Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're talking about the story of stateless children. Emma Kenyon was born in Tokyo to Canadian parents in 1985. At 6 months old, she and her family moved back to Toronto, where she grew up, attended university, and married her husband, Dan, who was also born outside of Canada. In 2016, Emma and Dan moved to Hong Kong temporarily, where they decided to start a family. They got pregnant in April 2021, but under Canadian law, their child would not receive Canadian citizenship. Citizenship is not passed to the second generation born overseas. But under Hong Kong law, the child would not have Hong Kong or Chinese citizenship. The child would be born stateless. I pre-recorded my conversation with Emma, who is still in Hong Kong. Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Hong Kong. So I understand you've now had your baby, and congratulations. I just wanted to ask how you are doing and if there have been any developments in your case.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. We're doing really well. The baby is now 4 months old. He's growing fast, so we're really happy. In terms of the case, it's progressing. We're hoping to get in front of a judge soon. To be honest, we had hoped that the government wouldn't take up this case. We'd hoped that they would just amend the legislation, but they haven't done that. And so, we're ready to fight and take it to the Supreme Court if we have to.
So your baby was, as you were concerned, your baby was born stateless. And I was wondering if you could explain for our viewers what the consequences of that are. What does it mean for your child's life?
Yeah, I mean, it means that he doesn't have access to Canadian citizenship and the basic kind of rights and protections that entails. He doesn't have access to a passport, so he can't travel, into Canada. He can't travel freely. And really worrying for us is he doesn't have access to consular services, which has been a concern, during COVID in Hong Kong.
But he doesn't have that, not just for Canada, but for any state. So he's not able to have all kinds of services that your country should be able to assist you with. But I do understand that he is going to be issued a special travel document from Hong Kong. Can you explain that?
Yeah, we're quite lucky in that Hong Kong, I sort of discovered this actually through Facebook, has a document that it gives to people who can't have access to passports from their home countries, or for people who are stateless. So it's a travel document that he can use to apply for visas from certain countries that accept it, and it's tied to my employment visa. So it's a kind of time-limited travel document.
Well, it's fortunate that there is something, but clearly there's something broken in the system here. And you wrote to the Canadian government about it, asking for their help. What was their reaction when you wrote to them?
Yeah, I wrote to the consulate, I wrote to MPs, I wrote to the minister's office. They were really dismissive. Kind of uninterested. They were, sort of lacking in compassion and empathy. And they basically said to me, your baby will be stateless. If you don't want your baby to be stateless, go back to Canada and have the baby there. Those are your options.
And it's not super compassionate messaging coming from the government. Is the issue that the minister would not, there's no way for them to grant an exception for your child because of the way the law is structured? Or does the minister have some discretion and just isn't exercising it here to help you and your child?
So the way the law is written, there is no kind of exemption. Unlike in the US or the UK, where you can prove that you have a substantial connection to that country and then confer your citizenship, Canada doesn't have that in place. So there's the way the law is written, there's no exemption. The minister does have some discretion to grant citizenship on an exceptional basis. But when I emailed the minister's office asking about this and asking about the process, they didn't respond to my emails. They sort of stopped interacting with me.
I mean, that's bizarre. You would think that if there's some exceptional circumstances, this would certainly rise to them. I mean, you have quite a substantial connection to Canada. It's where you spent most of your life. It's where your husband spent most of his life. You have plans to return to Canada. So I just don't understand the way the government has treated you here. We do have to go to commercial break right now, but when we come back, I want to ask you a few more questions about the development of your case and what's going on and some more of the background here.
Great.
Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where I'm discussing a challenge to Canadian citizenship laws brought by Emma Kenyon and a number of other individuals. Now, Emma, your sister, who is only a few years different in age from you, you both grew up together. You grew up in the same home. You spent your lives in Canada. And she does not have the same restrictions on her life, on her children's life, that you have, because unlike you were born in Tokyo, Japan, while your parents were working overseas there. Your sister was born in Canada. So can you elaborate on some of the differences and why it makes you feel like your citizenship is sort of second class compared to your sisters or other Canadians?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, my sister and I, both our parents are Canadian citizens. We grew up together. We went to the same schools. We are fundamentally equally Canadian in experience. And but because she was born in Canada, she was able to confer her citizenship to my nephews. And because I was born in Japan, lived there for 6 months of my life, I am not able to do the same to my child. And I think that speaks for itself. Her citizenship comes with more rights than my citizenship does. And I'll also just mention that for decades we had identical citizenship. This was not an issue. It was only in 2010, when this law was passed by the Harper government, that suddenly the terms of my citizenship changed and mine became weaker.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to Sujit Choudhry, your lawyer in this matter, in the next segment, about kind of the background of that law changing, what the previous law looked like. But yeah, certainly this change had a really significant impact on your life. I read your materials, I read your affidavits, and one comment really stood out to me. Your affidavit was incredibly compelling, but there was an instance where you wrote to a Canadian MP and you explained your situation and asked for help. But her office's response was shocking to me. They said, well, if you want your baby not to be stateless, you should just make your life easier and come to Canada. And you'd explain to her all the reasons why you couldn't come to Canada to have your baby, and they're pretty good reasons. So why don't you explain that to our viewers, and also, can you explain how receiving that email from an MP made you feel?
Yeah, I mean, there were many reasons why it wasn't feasible for us to go back to Canada to have the baby. One of them was that we were in the midst of a global pandemic, and we were really nervous about me being a heavily pregnant woman traveling back to Canada during COVID, and worried about bringing a newborn, unvaccinated baby back to Hong Kong during COVID as well. At the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, my husband and I lost a pregnancy when I was 22 weeks along. And we were very, very scared of taking any undue health risks that could hurt our baby. So, we didn't want to travel. We also don't have Medicare coverage in Canada. We're not residents. So we would have had to pay out of pocket for our care. And we were really worried that if there was a complication, it could have a huge financial cost to us. And lastly, many government officials made this flippant comment that we should just go home and have the baby, as though I'm not a working woman who has a job. We're a 2-income household. We live in a very expensive city. I can't just take months off of work unpaid and also pay for my healthcare costs out of pocket. And, that was financially impossible for us. And maternity leave in Hong Kong is only 14 weeks. We don't get a year. We don't get 18 months. So for those sort of main reasons, in addition to a number of others, that just wasn't possible for us. In terms
Hong
of that
Kong also
email,
has an extensive quarantine restriction upon return as well, right?
Yeah, for a long time, up until recently, within the last week, it was 3 weeks hotel-based quarantine that individuals had to pay for themselves. And if you tested positive, you were taken to a state quarantine center, and many people were there for weeks before being transferred to the hotel quarantine. Up until last week, Canada was on a banned list. You couldn't fly direct from Canada. So it was very, very difficult to travel between Hong Kong and Canada for a very, very long time.
So we've only got about 20 seconds. How did you feel when you got that email from that MP?
I was so disappointed. I felt so let down. I felt like, once again, no one in government was listening to me. And I felt that nobody sort of would acknowledge the difficulties that I was experiencing.
I'm so sorry that you've been going through this, and I want to wish you luck on your case, Emma. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're talking about a Canadian law that's resulting in stateless children being born to Canadian parents overseas. We're now joined by Sujit Choudhry, who's representing the families of these children who are challenging the law, and by Patrick Chandler, another parent of these children being impacted by the law who's also involved in the challenge. Thank you both for joining us. Patrick, in the last segment, we talked to Emma, who has had a child born in Hong Kong, is now stateless as a result of the Canadian law. And you have a similar but slightly different story. So like Emma's, your child was born stateless. So what can you tell me about the circumstances that led up to that?
Thanks, Christine. There's circumstances that really should have never come about, to be quite frank. My daughter was born in 2009 in China. I had originally gone to China in 2008. My daughter was born in 2009, just after Bill C-37 came into effect in April. My daughter was born in June. And I said, okay, great. I'm going to go to the Canadian embassy in Beijing, and we're going to get her a passport and citizenship and all that fun stuff that you need so that your kid can travel with you and, go back to Canada and things like that. And I had all the paperwork in place. I got to the embassy. The receptionist or the clerk rather was basically stamping the papers with the official sort of seal of approval with me standing there. And then at the very last moment, she said, "Oh, wait, hang on a second. Your child was born in Beijing and you weren't born in Canada yourself. Your child can't get citizenship." And I was stunned. I had absolutely no idea that this was a thing, that this could even have ever been a thing. But that's essentially how it came about.
So even though you had spent most of your life in Canada, this is what the impact has been for your child. And that was a new law when that happened to your child. So G, what can you tell me about the background leading up to why that law was enacted and what the law was before?
Sure. So, all countries with high rates of immigration have policies or rules around transmitting citizenship abroad across more than one generation, and Canada's no different. So, until this law, what was in place in Canada was something called a substantial connection requirement. So to give the viewers a bit of background, so Emma Kenyon was born in Japan to her parents, and Patrick was born in Tripoli, Libya, to his parents. And they both came home as small children with their parents back to Canada and grew up here. And under the old law, if individuals like Patrick or Emma had spent a sufficient amount of time in Canada, that they established a substantial connection to Canada, they would then have the right to pass on citizenship abroad to their own children. And that's how the law works right now in Australia, in the UK, in the US. But in 2008, our Citizenship Act was amended to remove the substantial connection test. And so no matter what Patrick or Emma did, no matter how long they lived in Canada, no matter how committed they were to Canada, they could never remove this impairment on their citizenship and couldn't transmit citizenship to their children abroad.
So under the old law, it sounds like they would have been able to pass on their citizenship, and this changed for them. So Patrick, I want to ask you, what were your concerns when you found out that your child would be born stateless?
Well, I didn't even really. I mean, coming out of the embassy that day, because that was really the first time when I found out. I mean, my mind was blank. Like I didn't even know what to think. Like I was just in so much shock. Like I was like, well, there's got to be some sort of a solution here. I'll go to the embassy another day and I'll talk to someone there. So like that's what I was thinking. But then when I realized that wasn't an option, that they were, that citizenship wasn't going to be coming from Canada, I started getting really, 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 really nervous, really, really scared, to be quite frank. How was I ever going to get my child on an airplane? If you don't have citizenship, well, where are you getting a passport from? How can you travel? Where do you get these documents? Is my child ever going to be able to go to Canada or travel the world? What do I do here next? I was quite young at the time. I was in my early 20s and a new father. So you can imagine that something like this is really just, it's not really something that anyone should have to go through.
It sounds terrifying. It sounds terrifying. Absolutely. We've got to go to commercial break, but we will be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing a Canadian citizenship law that's being challenged because it's rendering Canadians born overseas unable to pass on their citizenship to their children born overseas, even if there's a big connection to Canada, and even if it makes some children stateless. So Sujit, how common a problem is this? How many people are born stateless as a result of this Canadian law? And I think there's also a broader problem here of even if they are eligible for another citizenship, they perhaps should still be able to obtain their Canadian one from their parents.
Right. So I think there's a couple of things you've raised there that I'll speak to. So the first thing is that according to Statistics Canada, there are 173,000 Canadian citizens currently living in Canada, like Patrick, who themselves were born abroad to Canadian parents and have their citizenship by descent. So every single one of those people faces this, has a second-class status. Because they can't pursue opportunities to study and work and travel abroad as easily as people who don't have that impairment, because they can't necessarily pass on citizenship to their children. So that's a large number of people. How many children are being born stateless? We don't know. And part of the problem is that that data sits with the government. It doesn't sit with us. What I'll also say is that there are potentially there are going to be Canadians abroad who would like to take the benefit of this, a change to a law that we're asking for. But the thing to keep in mind is that Canada has exceptionally high immigration targets right now that we're not even coming close to meeting, 400,000, 500,000 a year, that we all need for economic and demographic reasons. And there's a lot of consensus across party lines that we need a lot of immigrants. And so to the extent the argument is going to be, well, there's too many people out there who we can't take into Canada if they become citizens, the answer is that's nonsense. Based on the government's own policies. And we say that these people should be recognized as Canadians, and they should be allowed to come here and settle and contribute to our country.
So Patrick, after your children were born, you did return to Canada, but you were not able to bring your family with you, even though it was a very young child at the time. So can you explain why you couldn't bring your child back to Canada and how it was what it was like to be separated for such a long period?
Oh, it's thanks. That was probably the worst year of my life. And considering we've just gone through 2 years of pandemic and, that's been terrible. Like it just pales in comparison. When I got a job back in Canada, it was an important career move for me and a great opportunity. And as a father, you want to be a provider and give your kids, everything. So I said, this is an opportunity I can't pass up. We started making arrangements. We always expected that there was going to be a brief period of time in terms of separation. I go over first, a month, maybe plant the flag, find a great place to live, a nice house, etc. we didn't, we didn't expect it to turn into a year as my kids' permanent residency documents were being processed and so forth. So that took about a year, and during that time, we were living separate. How am I supposed to bring my kids to Canada when they don't have any legal status here? They don't have permanent residency. That we were applying for that. They don't have citizenship. They were denied that. And how am I going to get them into public schools? How am I going to get them, healthcare, things that they should be getting? You can't do that without status.
Sujit, we've only got 30 seconds. What remedy are you asking for in this court challenge? What order are you asking for? Very briefly.
We're asking for the law to be struck down. We're asking for the individual claimants to all receive the remedy of having this second-class status removed and for them to have the same rights that you and I have. And we're also asking for damages for two of the families, both because of the separation in Patrick's case from his kids and the case of Victoria Mariama because her kids lived here for 2 years and they had to leave.
We've got to go, but thank you so much for coming on. We've heard today about how a Canadian law is resulting in some children born abroad being denied Canadian citizenship, even when their parents have an extremely strong connection to Canada. In some cases, these children are even being born stateless, which has serious consequences for their lives. We've heard about a challenge to this law and how it's progressing through the courts. What should the rules of Canadian citizenship be for people born outside of Canada? What rules seem fair to you? You be the judge. Thanks for watching, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.